Okay, boys and girls, today we've got a relatively new product. It's the Hana Umami Blue cartridge, and I think you're going to like this because it's really good. I hope you enjoy it. Okay, as I said in the intro, the Hana Umami Blue is a relatively new cartridge. We've got a review sample here, and I've had a chance to do quite a bit of listening to it, compare it to a few other cartridges that we have in the reference system that I think are relevant to what a buyer might care about, and I'll talk you through that. But first, let's talk about who Hana is and how their products are kind of laid out. So the way I think about it is, Hana has got some entry and mid-level moving coil cartridges, the E series, the S series, and the M series. They're all available in low output, and no moving coil is high output, but basically what stands for high output in the moving coil world. Most people will have a phono preamp if they're into moving coils that's got enough gain to take care of the low output. If you don't, you're going to want the higher output cartridge. But the big thing and the key point I want to make is Hana has built a reputation for having really solid musical cartridges at each price point. The cartridges start in the $500 realm. You work up to $750, and then at $1,200 you get into the M series. I have an ML, which is the low output version, on hand, so I use that for some of the comparisons because I think someone might reasonably want to decide if they're interested in the Hana line. Do I need to spend $2,500, which is what the Umami Blue costs, or is $1,200 going to get me most of the way there? Also, there's no guarantee that when someone makes a more expensive cartridge that it's better. So I'll be back in a little bit to tell you about how I set this up, and then we'll talk about sound quality.
The Absolute Sound thanks AudioQuest for providing the interconnects used in today's reference system.
Okay, those of you who have extensive experience with phono cartridges will know that setup really matters. There are a lot of variables to how the stylus is positioned in the groove, and those include zenith angle and azimuth and overhang and vertical tracking angle and, of course, stylus force and gain and loading and even more. That's a lot of variables you're playing with, and so when someone's reviewing a cartridge, to some degree, you're going to get feedback on the intrinsic qualities of the cartridge. To some degree, you're also potentially going to get some input on their setup. So, as I said, I mainly, for purposes of this review, compared the Hana Umami Blue to the Hana ML, and I set them both up using Wally Tools. The Wally Tools Protractor is how I set overhang, and then I used the Analog Magic suite of tools to set zenith, azimuth, vertical tracking angle, gain, loading, stylus force, all of those things. As you'll see very briefly on screen here, the Analog Magic tools allow you to measure the actual output of the cartridge and set your settings that way rather than assuming that you know that a certain setting is going to be right. It's a measurement tool, not a physical dialing in tool. If you prefer to use those physical tools, Wally Tools has a superb suite of bits and pieces that can help you get your setup right and really well dialed in. Michael Fremer loves those, so there are different ways to go about this. But I took care to set up both cartridges in a way that suited each cartridge rather than just using a fixed setup system. I put the cartridges in my Technics SL1210G. It's one of my reference turntables. I think it's in a price class that is very appropriate for this kind of cartridge or these kinds of cartridges. Also, as a reviewer, I happen to like the fact that it's got a removable head shell. Let the food fight begin on removable head shells, but it's a convenience that makes accurate comparisons or meaningful comparisons a little bit easier to do. So I like that feature. I ran the Techniques with the Korf ceramic head shell and the Stein Music Perfect Interface Mat. Those are products that have been recommended by a number of listeners, and so that's what I used. Okay, as I said, we'll be back in a minute and we'll talk about sound quality. Just a brief interruption, esteemed viewers. As you may know, I'm Tom Martin, Chief Content Officer of The Absolute Sound. We have a new product. It's on the Substack platform, and we're going to do some interesting things with Substack. First of which is reader questions and answers. Each Monday, readers will submit questions. We'll pick the most interesting ones and we'll answer the questions on Friday. We'll also have early access to articles and special blogs that don't appear anywhere else. We hope you'll join us. It's only a cost of a cup of coffee per month. Just check on the screen or in the show notes below. Thanks, and now back to the show. The Umami Blue is the least expensive cartridge I've heard that does most of the things that the big high-end cartridges do. Maybe not to the same degree, but it's on that same wavelength. And what I mean by that is the Umami Blue manages to put together a balance of the beloved analog qualities that those of us who are into vinyl really revere. I'm going to call that analog yumminess. That's not a technical term, but there's a certain naturalness to how analog comes through that is well preserved by the Umami Blue. So that was part A that I really liked, combined with a high resolution, deep look into the music that is, frankly, the reason people tend to spend money on fancy cartridges. So combining those two things at a $2,500 price point is, I think, an important achievement, and that is about the highest praise that I can give a cartridge. Let's do some comparisons, because I also like the Hana ML. It's a very nice cartridge. What I would say is, big picture sense, the ML is a little more analog-y. It's the definition of instruments is a little bit more painted with a big brush. The Umami Blue paints with very careful and detailed lines. So take that for what it's worth, but I think the Hana ML is more a classic analog cartridge and doesn't go as far as some of the really high-end cartridges do to give you high resolution together with analog yumminess. So there's a picture, but let me give you some details. First of all, the bass definition with the Umami Blue is, in my mind, clearly better. I happen to like the bass balance a little bit better, and that might be something that could be refined with more testing on the exact loadings I used, although I aimed for pretty much the same frequency response curve, but frequency response curves are, only one tool. But I like the bass definition better on the Umami Blue, and it was quite good. The second thing I'll talk about that I loved on the Umami Blue is what I like to call instrumental separation, what some people call spotlighting. There will be 400-600 performers on stage, and the thing we're looking for, some of us are looking for, I think some people are actually not looking for this, but What some of us are looking for is the sense that if you want to, you can focus on an individual performer and you can follow the musical line that they're delivering. You can also, kind of pan back and listen to the entire band or the entire orchestra. But that ability to hear the performers distinctly is a really glorious thing. And I think you don't usually get that until you're at this level of cartridge. So that instrumental separation and spotlighting is a second thing. I combine that, and it might be the same thing, but it's a useful way to tease apart the expression. The soundstage with the Umami Blue just seemed bigger and deeper, and the stability of the positioning of instruments in that soundstage seemed more locked in. Of course, if you've got a mixing guy who's moving things around, that won't be the case. But I'm talking about on well-recorded items where a jazz quartet or an orchestra is presented accurately. The Umami Blue does a very nice job of rendering width and depth and having that be a stable kind of event. Okay, so those are some qualities that you hear in the Umami Blue that with lesser cartridges may not stand out quite as much. A final one that I want to mention because it's turning out to be a big thing in my experience in terms of musical enjoyment is something I'm going to call dynamic naturalness. You want in this case, the cartridge, you could say this for speakers or amplifiers or anything. You want the component to give you dynamic snap and pop, but you want it to sound natural or real or realistic, not like it's an artifact of transient overshoot. This cartridge does a very good job on that subject of putting together poppy, fun, really enjoyable dynamics while having them sound like you would actually hear them if you were in a club or another performance venue. So I thought that was a beautiful, beautiful thing. All right, now I'll come back in a minute and finish up with a few thoughts about this cartridge. I want to particularly compare it to a cartridge that is a price point above this, uses a different technology, and I think this will help you understand kind of the spectrum that we have from $1,000 plus or minus cartridges up to $4,000 and $5,000 cartridges on today's market. I've tried to compare the Umami Blue to another cartridge in the highly respected Hana line because, those of you who've been reading reviews will possibly be thinking about buying Hana cartridges, and you want to know where this fits. So that's part number one. Part number two of my comparisons is I did not have an Umami Red on hand, so I'm sorry, but I really can't give you that comparison. Andre Jennings has this cartridge as well, and he will be doing a review in the Absolute Sound magazine, and I hope he makes that comparison there. But I do have a cartridge that's in between the Umami Blue and the Umami Red in price, and I think that provides also an interesting comparison, and honestly, if you can, a comparison that you ought to make. And that's with the DS003 cartridge. Now, those of you who've been, reading what we are working on will know that DS Audio makes optical cartridges. They're not shining a light on the record. The way that the movement of the stylus and cantilever is sensed is with an optical device rather than with an electromagnetic device. So what? But it's a different technology, and I will say, because I have the DS003 on hand, I will say it's a cartridge system. You have to use their pre-preamp as well as using the cartridge because the adjustments that need to be made aren't the same as with a typical RIAA style moving magnet or moving coil cartridge. Anyway, The DS audio has a level of clarity and transparency that I personally like quite a bit. I think it's very realistic, but it crosses a boundary in my mind where it is so clear and so clean that some people, not yours truly, but some people feel like we've lost some of the analog yumminess that I mentioned at the beginning. Personally, I think that's a little bit of confusion between blur and noise and some other artifacts that can happen in analog reproduction, and what's really great about analog, which is wide bandwidth, frequency response well above 20 kilohertz, and the lack of digital artifacts like pre-ringing, something I've been pounding on about, even though modern recordings may not have it, but there were certainly recordings made in the 80s and 90s that did. And there are other analog or digital artifacts that are worth worrying about. And I think what the DS003 does is it really gets you down to the analog goodness stuff with none of the blur factor. But what is interesting about this cartridge and what I found really exciting about it is it challenges my view about the DS003 because it gives you a huge amount of transparency while feeling just one click more, if you had a knob that went from 1 to 10, one click more analog-like. And for those who are disturbed by the sound of the DS audio cartridges, this might be actually the better place to find home, and you save at least $1,000 going with the Umami Blue. So I thought it was really nicely positioned in the pantheon of cartridges that are in the lower few thousands. I mean, if you're paying attention, you can spend 8, 9, 10,000 on a cartridge, and you can spend huge amounts on phono preamps and so on. But the balance of this cartridge, I don't mean top to bottom, although it's true the top to bottom balance is very nice. I mean the balanced delivery of all of the good factors is what Hana is known for, and to me this cartridge really nailed it. I hope you've enjoyed it. I will be back in a second to talk about the reference system, but if you're not interested in that, thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel and subscribe to our other platforms. We'd love to have you join us. Okay, as kind of a coda, some commenters have asked for a little more information on the reference systems that we're using. So I'll just tell you what I used for this particular review. I don't know that it's super possible to figure out what this means, but inquiring minds want to know, so you get to know. All right, I already told you about the turntable rig. I used Musical Surroundings Phenomena 3 phono cartridge with their linear power supply. That's what Musical Surroundings, the importer of the Hana cartridges, recommends. And we like to follow the recommendations of the importer, and I quite enjoyed it. The gain and the loading are very easy to set, and there are very small steps in the adjustments that you can make, which I thought was very nice. I used primarily AudioQuest cabling, both for interconnects and for speakers. I used Shunyata AC cables and power director, and we ran the Phenomena 3 into a Audio Research Ref 6 preamp, and we went from the Ref 6 preamp into PS Audio BHK 600 monoblocks, and I had the BHK 600s driving Magico A5 speakers. So that's pretty much the setup that we've got. For digital purposes, I use DCS Lena, DAC, and Master Clock, as a point of comparison. Also on hand, we have a J. Shakura Initial Max turntable with their tone arm, and that's where I happen to have the DS Audio cartridge that I referred to. And DS Audio has to be run into a special preamp, so I have the matching DS Audio preamp. I hope that helps. I hope that's interesting. And as I said, we are really pleased that you joined us, and we hope we'll see you back soon. Thanks.